This lesson is a continuation of the idea that we started in the dressing up your minor pentatonic scales with modal extractions. If you haven't done that one, you probably should go back and do that one first. But the basic idea is that we're taking a pentatonic scale, which is a 5-note scale, and we're adding the 2 notes that diatonic or 7-note scales have. Diatonic scales are major, minor, all of your what we call diatonic modes. But we're adding those 2 notes, and in one case 1 note, to this pentatonic scale shape, just so you can kind of see exactly where the differences are between those sounds. It helps train your ear to hear what those sounds are a little bit better, makes it easier for you to access those sounds. What we're going to do today is we're going to take that major pentatonic, and just like we did in the performance part of the video at the beginning, we're going to do major pentatonic, just to remind you where we're at. We're going to be in the E root shape here at the 8th fret for C major. And with that, we're going to add the 4th note of the major scale, or the perfect 4th to start with. And then we're going to add the 7th, which will give us a full major scale. And then we're going to raise the 4th, which will give us a Lydian scale sound. And then we're going to go natural 4th, but with a minor 7th, which gives us a mixed Lydian or a dominant chord sound. And then last but not least, we're going to do the minor 7th with the sharp 4, which gives us a Lydian dominant sound, which is a pretty cool sound to use over a static 7th chord. So with that in mind, let's get started. We're going to start with the major pentatonic scale, the 5 notes that are sort of the framework for all of the stuff that we're going to be changing around to get the different scale sounds. We start with the root, and the root is going to be on the 8th fret 6th string. We're in the key of C major. And the root pattern, if you're doing the cage system way of organizing things, is based around your open E chord or the bar chord based off of that open chord. So we're starting with the root. Then we've got 2, 3, 5, 6, root, 2, 3, 5, 6, root, and then 2 again. Now, one of the sounds that I like using, without even getting into the diatonic thing or the 7-note scales, is just adding the 4th into this. All right, a lot of times you get those sounds like it's Southern rock, or even like that sort of thing that I like doing a lot in pop. It's just cool because what you're doing is you're just adding 1 note to that pentatonic scale, and now you've got something you can use a little bit more melodically. So we're just going root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're playing the major scale essentially without the 7th. Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, root, 2. The full major scale is going to add the 7th, which is B in this case. So root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root, and then 2. Then we come back down, 7, root, or root, 7, root. We're ending right there. All right. All right. That's just your run-of-the-mill major scale. A lot of times when I have to play in a major key and I'm soloing, the sound of going up and down a major scale by itself isn't very musical, especially if you're playing more of a rock context. So I'll think more in terms of the major pentatonic. Maybe I'll add the 4th in there for those kinds of licks that we're talking about before. But then also, in order to get that major 7th to work sometimes, I'll actually just play a triad based off of the 5 chord. So what we have here is G major, root 3, 5, root 3, 5 of the G major, which happens to be in this key 5, 7, 2, 5, 7, 2, and then I'll resolve it to the 1. An idea that I've actually stolen from Django Reinhardt recording. I might have actually talked about this in the previous video. All right, so that's the major scale. The next thing that we can do as far as alterations is we can make it a Lydian mode. And the only difference between major and Lydian is that instead of there being a half step between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8, the half steps are between 4 and 5. So we have a raised 4 and then 7 and 8. So we have root 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or root 2, 3, there's your sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, root, and there's the 2 in this position. It kind of sounds kind of Simpson-y. All right. The Lydian scale is great if you're playing over a major chord that isn't the one chord in a key. If you're in the key of G and you're playing a bunch of chords that establish the key, if you're playing G major, C major, D major, E minor, then that major sound has to be the major scale, right? But if you're playing over a vamp where it's just like C major, we can get away with. We can hit that note, right? And it works really nice to give you a little bit more modern sound. In the major scale, that 4 is part of how the 5 chord resolves to the 1 chord, right? That provides that tension. And when you've got all of those chords in that key, establishing that sound, it's real hard to work against. You could try it, by all means, give it a try, but I'm willing to bet you're going to find that if you're in a purely functional diatonic chord progression, you're going to have to play major, and you're going to have to save the Lydian for when you're playing more of a static major chord. Or if you're playing in a song where there's a major 7 chord that's not the 1 chord. If you're playing like C major, then maybe it goes to E flat major, which is totally out of key. All right, and then I resolved it back into C major. These things, if you're playing over full chord progressions, it's difficult to make this stuff work. But if you're playing over static chords, then that's usually where the modes work best for us, for how we're using this stuff. So the next thing we're going to deal with is the idea that we can play that major scale, but if we lower the 7th a half step, we get a dominant sound, right? So it's root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, minor 7, root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's the minor 7 here, root, and then 2. Right? And that works over just a dominant C chord. By itself, that scale's kind of boring sounding, but if you're playing... Alright, you can play it over any kind of bluesy sort of thing, a dominant chord that sits by itself. For me, if I'm playing over a static dominant chord, I would rather hear what we call the Lydian dominant sound, which is actually, it's either the dominant, the mixed Lydian scale with a sharp 4, or it's the Lydian scale with a flat 7. They're literally the same thing. A lot of times we'll just call it Lydian dominant. So we have root 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, minor 7, root 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, minor 7, root and 2. This scale is actually a mode of the melodic minor scale. It's not a major mode, but it actually works within this context. So we can... we can actually put those sounds in on top of that. The idea here is that we take something that's familiar to you, and by moving these notes around, what you start doing is you start becoming a little bit more attuned to how these scales sound. Most guitar players, myself included, when we first learn how to play different scales or modes, we learn a fingering, and we don't necessarily tie that to an actual sound, really. It develops over time. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to hear specifically what changes and what is unique to each of these sounds by basing them all around a common 5-note pattern, which happens to be the major pentatonic in this thing. So if you haven't done the previous lesson, which is the same idea around a minor pentatonic scale, go ahead. There's going to be a link to the video below this video. And then give this thing a whack. There is also the backing track that I was playing over. There's links to not only the backing track in this key, but in all 12 diatonic keys. And then also please remember to subscribe and click the little notification bell for further lessons, gear demos, and backing tracks.